Hello, and thank you for being with us today. I'm the State Budget Director, Robert Mujica, and it's my honor to be with you to celebrate the signing of this vitally important piece of legislation. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize a few special guests. We have George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. Lou Picani, President of Teamsters Local 456. Benjamin Boykin, Chairman of Westchester County Legislature. Paul Feiner, Supervisor of the Town of Greenburgh. Michael Spano, Mayor of the City of Yonkers. Brian Smith, Mayor of the Village of Irvington. Robert McLaughlin, Mayor of the Village of Dobbs Ferry. Lawrence Lynn, Mayor of the Grandview on Hudson. Elon Gilbert, Supervisor, Town of Yorktown. Kevin Hansen, Supervisor, Town of Pound Ridge. Dana Levenberg, Supervisor of Town of Ossining. Howard Phillips, Supervisor of the Town of Haverstraw. And Maureen Fleming, Supervisor of the Town of Kent. So we're here today because the Federal Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is neither a tax cut nor a job creator in New York State. It's actually quite the opposite. By capping state and local tax deductibility, it hurts our competitiveness and transfers much of the wealth of New York State to other states across the nation. Governor Cuomo is not one to stand idle while New Yorkers are harmed. On the day we released the executive budget, the governor told the people of the state that he would submit a plan to protect them, and he saw it through fruition. He was true to his word, and the 2019 budget enacts a series of reforms to the New York State tax code. They're designed to defend against the adverse impact of the federal tax changes. First, the budget creates new options for tax-deductible charitable donations. New Yorkers will be able to donate to new funds for the purposes of improving health care and education. Taxpayers who itemize will be able to claim charitable contributions as deductions on their federal and state tax returns. They will also get a state tax credit in the tax year after those donations are made. Local governments and school districts may also establish new charitable funds and offer real property tax credits to incentivize contributions to these new charitable funds. These state and local funds will help support vital causes while also helping to preserve the tax deductibility that our tax system was built upon. Second, the budget creates new ways for employers to help employees with their federal tax bill. While the federal tax reform eliminated state and local tax deductibility for individuals, businesses were spared these limitations and are still allowed to deduct state and local taxes. Employers now will have an opt-in to a new employer compensation expense program. They will pay a phased-in tax on annual payroll expenses. The progressive personal income tax system in New York State will be preserved, will remain in place, but employees will now be able to claim a new personal income tax credit. At the end of the day, the system will be neutral to the state. Employers will be held harmless, but more importantly, employees will be given the opportunity to reduce their federal tax burden by maintaining deductibility. And finally, the bill decouples the state tax code from the federal tax code where necessary to avoid state tax increases that were brought on solely by federal tax changes. These reforms to our state tax code are the result of collaborations between state agencies, many tax professionals, businesses, and legal experts. But primarily, they're a result of the governor's leadership in making sure that New Yorkers were protected. As usual, the governor is blazing the trail in New York State. Ours is the first state in the nation to pass legislation protecting its taxpayers from the federal tax returns. Other states have begun passing bills around the country based on the precedent that New York has set. Many pundits said it would be hard. Many said it would be impossible, but Governor Cuomo got it done. So first, we're going to see a short clip from Congresswoman Nita Lowey. But now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce the 56th governor of New York State, Governor Andrew Cuomo.
New York and other states are rightly worried about the impact of slashing the SALT deduction. I applaud Governor Cuomo's creative approach of establishing a charitable trust which would allow taxpayers to offset their state and local taxes by making a charitable contribution and allowing businesses to opt into a new payroll tax system.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. First, Congresswoman Nita Lowey. It's one of the shortest speeches I ever heard Congresswoman Nita Lowey give. Nita and I go way back. Nita actually worked with my father back when he was lieutenant governor, and she was the regional representative. And in many ways, they are fundamentally the same person. They're driven by doing the right thing. They see public service as a vehicle to make change for people. And it's always about principle, and they never shy for a fight. Let's give her a round of applause. County Executive George Latimer, what a breath of fresh air. Isn't it great to have George as the county executive? He was a fantastic legislator. We're sad to see him leave, but I tell you the truth, I think he does a better service for the people here in Westchester in this capacity, because we desperately need local leadership and local executive leadership, because it's a different world. One more round of applause for our good county exec. Robert Mujica, who you just heard from, he's the budget director for the state of New York. We started with a $4.4 billion deficit, which gives me heavy agita, surus, whatever word you want to use. But we got the budget done. We got it done on time. We got it with no tax increase. Robert Mujica. Lou Picani, our host, once again. Lou is always there for us. Thank you. He was introduced, but Ben Boykin, we're honored that you're the presiding officer. Let's give Ben a round of applause. He's shown to be a great chairman already. We have Mike Spano from Yonkers. Let's give him a big round of applause. And to all the local electeds, and Rob Greenstein, who's my local elected, let's give them a round of applause. Today is tax day, and it's fitting that we're here to talk about taxes on tax day. I talk to you today not just as your governor, but as your neighbor, as a resident of Westchester County, who pays Westchester County property taxes, and all the other taxes that are on that long property tax list you get, and call to complain about how high taxes are. I complain about how high taxes are. I call George and I complain about property taxes. So I feel it, I get it, and we have to do something about it. And that's what today is all about. These are difficult days in general for the country, for the world. You know, things are happening now on a daily basis that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago. I spoke to a young lady a couple of weeks ago, and she said to me, you know, I don't even recognize my country anymore. There are things that are happening that are just incredible. And it's being driven by the federal level. It is a different administration with a different philosophy. And I can tell you they are no friends to the state of New York. They represent a different philosophy than made New York, New York. They represent a philosophy that is not the way we live, not our set of values. And we feel it from the way they treat and think about immigrants. You know, they're anti-immigrant. A greater act of hypocrisy you have never seen. I'd like to say to President Trump and Mr. Ryan and Mr. McConnell, unless you are a member of the Navajo tribe or the Apaches or the Sioux, then you are an immigrant too. And you know, they're anti-immigrant. What they're doing with DACA is undocumented. I come from Italian immigrants. You know what they used to call Italians? They don't, before all the political correctness of the day. Italians were called WAPs. Why WAPs? Without papers. When they got to Ellis Island and they didn't have documentation. W-O-P, without papers. You were a WAP. But you were brought in because they believed that the promise of this country that brought people here in the first place was true. That we invited all in, and we invited them to the family of America, and we wanted them to work hard, and we'd work with them, and they would do good things. So they let in my grandparents, WAPs, and they gave birth to a son who went to public school named Mario Cuomo, wound up doing pretty good and made a contribution. And he gave birth to a son named Andrew Cuomo, who wound up doing pretty good, not as good as his old man, but pretty good. And that's the story of America. And they are now trying to rewrite that story. They're against women's rights. They're against equal rights for women. They have a different view on guns and gun safety. We believe in the Second Amendment. We believe legal ownership of guns and hunting and the tradition. But they want to impose concealed carry permits nationwide, which means if you get a concealed carry permit from any state, you can bring a gun to any other state in the country. That totally tramples on states' rights and state laws, which was always the paramount federal, especially Republican philosophy. Leave it to the states, leave it to the states, let them decide. Well, they changed their tune on that 100%. But the most serious threat that the federal government has posed to us is an economic threat. And that's something they did in their tax bill. And it is a devastating economic attack on this state and a few others. But more than any other state, New York gets hurt by their tax bill. Now, they signed the tax bill in December. And short term, it had a benefit. Long term, it's a killer for New York. It reminds me of that old three-card Monte game. You guys are too young for three-card Monte. They'd have a guy on the corner, especially in New York City, and he'd have a little card table, and he'd have 3 cards. And you had to move the cards around, and you had to find whatever card was picked, the Queen of Hearts. And the first go-around, he'd let you win. And he'd give you whatever it was, $20. And you were now confident because you said, I got this guy, I just won $20. And he'd say, okay, you want to go double or nothing? And let's raise the stakes. And then he would do the second time, and you would lose. And the first time was a fake. It was just a phony, make you feel confident. Tax plan they signed in December gives taxpayers a slight withholding benefit this year. So you see your tax bill go down a little bit. People say, oh boy, I have more money in my pocket. My taxes went down 20 bucks a pay period. Yeah, you feel good. Next year, you're going to get slammed. That's what this tax reform does. Now, what the tax reform basically did was it took $1.5 trillion was the cost of the tax bill. 80% of the benefit goes to the top 1%. That is a fact. It's not a political statement. Corporations get a 40% tax cut. Okay? Now, this is after Mr. Trump ran on taking care of the middle class, right? He ran saying to the Teamsters, I'm your guy. I know the middle class is struggling, and by the way, the middle class is struggling. In real wages, the middle class has gone back 20 years in real wages. Everything else has gone up. Middle class wages have not kept pace. So the middle class wanted to hear somebody was with them, and he said, I'm with you. I'm your guy. Yeah? And then as soon as he got into office, he passed the federal tax plan. Everything goes to the rich. Well, they say, I think the middle class is going to benefit. How? Because when we give a tax cut to the corporation, maybe they'll give it to the workers in terms of higher wages. Yeah, maybe. And maybe there's a Santa Claus. Maybe. If you wanted to help the middle class, what you would have said is, I'm giving the middle class a tax cut. Or you would have said, I'm giving the corporation a tax cut on the condition that they give that to the middle class in terms of higher wages for the workers. Or we're giving the corporations a tax cut on the condition that they create new jobs. He didn't do any of that. It's just 40% to the corporations. Maybe they'll give higher wages to the middle class, or maybe they'll give themselves a bigger payday. Or maybe they'll have a dividend on the stock, or maybe they'll buy themselves a home in the south of France. It was a total betrayal of the middle class, and it wasn't even close. The most serious problem is what they did in the tax code, not in year one, what goes into effect in year two. And that's what Rob was talking about. That's called the SALT provision, state and local tax provision. And it was a little complicated, so people didn't really understand it at first. What the provision says is you can no longer deduct your state and local taxes, hence SALT, from your federal taxes. What does that mean? You made $100, you paid $5 in property tax, you paid $5 in state tax, that's $10 in tax. You deduct that from the $100, you now have $90 left, and then the federal government taxes the $90. What this says is, no, the federal government is going to tax you on $100. You say, well, hold on a second. I didn't make 100. I gave $5 to the county property taxes. I gave $5 to the state. And now the federal government is going to tax me on 100, which means they are taxing you on the taxes that you paid. It is the first double taxation in the history of the nation. And it is a serious problem to us in New York. Why? Because we have some of the highest property taxes in the United States of America. Westchester, Nassau County, in terms of absolute dollars, one of the highest property tax counties in the United States of America. Upstate New York, by the percentage of home value, upstate New York pays the highest property taxes in the nation. People don't understand it. FDR used to rail about this because people would complain about taxes to FDR. And he would get very defensive. New York has high taxes. And he would go on a rail that he was being accused of high taxes. He must have been thin-skinned, FDR. Not me. I'm thick, calloused skin. Doesn't matter what you say anymore. And he would say it's not the state tax, it's the property taxes that we have that are high. And historically, we've always had high property taxes. Why? Because we have so many local governments. There are over 10,000 local governments in the state of New York. It's how we organized. So when you add up all those towns, all those villages, all those municipalities, we have high property taxes. And we have to do something about it, and we have. First, we passed the first property tax cap in the history of the state, 2%. Property taxes were going up 6, 7, 8% a year. We passed a law, 2% cap, which means the locality can't raise taxes more than 2% unless they get a supermajority of the vote. It's worked extraordinarily well because it's just become a discipline. And now people say it shouldn't go up more than 2%. And the political pressure has kept it at about 2%. What SALT does is it eliminates all of that. Doesn't matter that we had a 2% property tax cap and we exercised discipline. Doesn't matter that I lowered every state tax rate in this state. Everybody pays a lower tax today than the day I took office. Everybody. What this does is it raises your property taxes when you can't deduct them. It raises them about 30%. It raises your income tax next year 30%. On average, Westchester, Long Island, $6,400 more for the average taxpayer. $6,400 more. They advertise it as a tax cut plan from your friendly federal government. And when you read the fine print, we take it right on the chin. Now, philosophically, it is, and historically, it is repugnant. First time in history that you have double taxation. The state's rights are trampled on by this federal law, and this exact move was tried in the 80s under President Reagan. My father was governor. Al D'Amato was senator from New York. And they pushed it back. And they stopped it. What's happened now is the country's become more polarized. The states that don't have a Republican senator, like New York, got the short end of the stick on the tax bill. It is against the entire philosophy of the tax system. Remember, it's the states that created the federal government, not the federal government that created the states. The first income tax, federal income tax, went into effect in 1862 by President Abraham Lincoln. He needed the tax to pay for the cost of the war. It was 3 to 5%, and this is what he said about the tax at the time he passed it. All other national and state and local taxes shall first be deducted to determine the taxpayer's liability for the income tax. Abraham Lincoln, when he signs the first income tax, all other taxes will be deducted first. That's the founding premise of it. The chair of House Ways and Means, when the tax was first passed, 1862, he sponsored the bill He says, as a matter of simple logic, you need to deduct the state and local taxes first, otherwise you would have double taxation. And that would violate the principle of federalism. Okay? That's 1862. Since 1862, this principle has been respected until now. So what are we doing about it? First, we believe it's unconstitutional, and we are going to sue on behalf of the states affected on the grounds that it is unconstitutional. And if there is any justice left in this court system, in their Supreme Court system, we should be successful on that. Second, we change the state law, and that's what Rob was explaining. You want to tax our current tax system? Fine. We'll change the tax system. You launch a missile from Washington, and the missile is headed to New York? Okay, we're going to get out of the way before the missile hits. So their premise was, we're going to tax your income tax. All right, we'll change the income tax, and we'll make it a payroll tax instead. What does that mean? Right now, the employer hands you a check, and you get taxed on the income. We'll say we'll have an option where the tax is on the amount paid by the employer instead, a payroll tax. What does that do? Payroll taxes are still deductible. So it costs the employer nothing to pay the tax because he deducts it. And then you get the check, and you don't have to pay income taxes on it, and you actually save the deduction. Well, we're going to tax property taxes. Okay, we have an idea on that too. We'll set up charitable not-for-profits. And instead of paying a property tax, make a charitable donation to an education not-for-profit. Make a charitable donation to a healthcare not-for-profit. And then you get a deduction for the contribution to a charitable organization. And in this bill, we say the local governments can do the same thing. So Westchester County can set up an education fund, a healthcare fund. You contribute to that fund, and you get a charitable deduction. As Rob said, we're the first state to do it. Other states are now following our lead and are passing similar bills. Is it perfect? No. Is it complicated? Yes. Would local governments have to shift dramatically? Yes. But when a missile is headed your way, you do whatever you have to do to get out of the way of the missile. And that's what this law does. The third thing that we're doing is we have to repeal the damn law, because the law is unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional. It was unconstitutional from the start, and we have to elect a Congress that is going to repeal this bill. And we have to take the Congress from the president, because when a president has a Republican Congress and a Republican Senate, that is a freight train, and you can't stop it. And you have President Trump, and you have Ryan, and you have McConnell, and he drives that freight train right through. The Democrats are there left throwing rocks at the freight train, doing the best they can to slow it down. But in truth, at the end of the day, when he has control of all three, he is in control. And that's why, without getting political today, November has to bring a different Congress to Washington. And that starts in the state of New York. Now, I'll tell you what makes this especially repugnant. How many states are affected by this SALT provision? 12 in the nation. All 12 happen to be Democratic states. All 12 happen to be states that Donald Trump lost. Now, maybe that's all a coincidence, that it just happens to be 12, and they just happen to be Democratic, and they just happen to be states that Trump lost. But I've been around too long to believe that it's a coincidence. It was using government policy as political retaliation. That's what it was. And you know what, my friends? There's politics, and then there's government. And in politics, it can be a rough and tumble business. I get it. And people try to win. I get it. But once you raise your hand and you take that oath of office, you're not supposed to be playing politics. You're supposed to be doing what's the right thing governmentally and responsibly. And you don't retaliate against states that didn't support you by sending an economic missile aimed for them. And this is not just a one shot. This would hurt these 12 states and put them at a point where we are just not as economically competitive as the other 38 states. The other 38 states got a pure tax cut, period. Cost of doing business is less. Property taxes are less. This hurts us because we didn't get a tax cut, we got a tax increase. And we are now at a long-term structural disadvantage to those other 38 states. I fight every day with businesses who say, well, I got a call from South Carolina, I got a call from Texas. They said if I move down there, I save this, this, and this. I talk to homeowners who say, you know what, I can't pay these property taxes anymore. If I move down to this state, I save this, this, and this. I say, yeah, the only problem is you then have to live in that state. And there's no state that can compare to New York. But that is what they are trying to do. They're trying to put us at a long-term competitive economic disadvantage. And it is that dire and that drastic and that mean-spirited that it's political retaliation while they're giving the top 1% a tax cut. Not only did they betray the middle class, which wound up getting nothing unless the corporate CEO deigns that they're morally impressed upon to give some crumbs from the table. But it sends literally an economic death wish to those other states. We cannot let that happen. We'll go to the court system. We pass this law, which does everything it can to circumvent it, but we have to get it repealed, and we have to get it repealed in November. It is not just a question of politics, because this affects not just Democrats. It affects Democrats, Republicans, independents, short people, tall people. I don't care. Your taxes go up. And that is repugnant to everything we have done. And it's a misuse of government power. And my number one job is to protect the people of the state of New York. And I take that very seriously. And whether we're getting attacked by a storm, a hurricane, a terrorist attack, or political retaliation from Washington, I'm not going to stand for it. and I'm going to do everything I can. And I'm going to do everything I can to protect New Yorkers. And working together, we're going to beat these guys back. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, Governor, for laying out the case perfectly well about what we face all across New York State and in those other 12 states. But if we can be very parochial, we face it here in Westchester County, where the vast majority of us pay much more than $10,000 a year in the combination of property and local taxes. I'm joined here by Deputy County Executive Ken Jenkins, our Director of Operations, Joan McDonald, John Nona, our County Attorney, our team in Westchester County running this government, the new team, along with all of our colleagues in town and village government. We are going to work with you and this administration to try to fight this in every way we can, because this is what our taxpayers demand. They demand a creative way to be able to stop this from happening. This federal government decision, as you've articulately said, has robbed Westchester County. It's threatened our way of life. We invest in our schools. We invest in mass transit. We invest in a better life for our people and the services that we have, our fine police and fire services, all the things that our tax dollars pay for. That's what you're fighting for, Governor, when you're fighting for Westchester. And here in your home county, we appreciate very much this leadership. We want to thank our state legislators who are in Albany right now for voting for this and giving us the opportunity to try to implement it. We in Westchester County will work with all of the local governments together and try to figure out how we can implement this as partners, from the big city of Yonkers down to the little village of Dobbs Ferry. Whatever it takes for us to do this, we'll do this together, and we'll stand behind the governor in this effort. So with that thought, Governor, please come up to the desk where your signature on this legislation will make it official. And thank you for doing it here in your home county of Westchester.
Thank you, brother.
Stand with you there.
Yep. Congratulations.